Welcome to Coastal Front. Join us each week as we sit down with the movers and shakers of Vancouver to discuss stories of business, politics, accomplishment, and failure. Our aim is to keep you dialed into what matters most in our city. Now, here's your host, Andrew Johns.
Okay, well, here we are. You're Stacy Webb. You are the Director of Marketing Communications for Freshwater Fisheries Society of British Columbia.
That's correct.
Thanks for coming today, Stacy.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really glad to have you here. I'm actually really excited. I was looking forward all week to having a chat with you as we started talking about just before we started filming. I've fished through most of my adult life as a recreational fisherman, very unsuccessful fisherman. I think I got more tackle in the water than I've pulled fish out of the water. But my father-in-law has been fishing. He's turning 71, and shout out to my father-in-law, Jerry, who's probably going to listen to this. He's been fishing since he was like 10 years old. Started off fishing in the Vetter River out in Chilliwack, and then made his way up to Kamloops, and then eventually spent the last half of his life still actively fishing on Vancouver Island, the Cowichan River, and his favorite spot being out in Port Alberni on the Sumas and Stamp River. And so we're going to spend some time over the next little while here talking about, what is the Freshwater Fisheries Society of BC? What do you do as an organization? How are you funded? And talk about some of the challenges that we're all facing with declining fish stocks, which is kind of a global phenomenon. And I think it's really neat to dial this down into a local level and hear what you have to say and what we need to do as a society to kind of make this a sustainable sustainable organized practice, of fishing. So maybe we'll start off by talking a bit about your organization. I believe you used to be part of the provincial government, and now you're a completely separate entity. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So I think it was around 2001 when the BC Liberals came into power in British Columbia. They looked at sort of how different recreational programs were being funded. And so they set up a committee, and one of the recommendations that came out of that was to use, to do things differently. And so in 2003, we were separated from government, set up as a not-for-profit organization, and license fees, which used to go into general revenue, we received at the time in 2003 about 70% of fishing license fees to fund the provincial hatchery program is the bulk of what we do. And then in 2015, they amended our 30-year contract, and we now receive 100% of license revenue to mostly what we do is run provincial hatchery programs, but we also do run some programs to make fishing more accessible for anglers.
Okay. Is that your polite way of saying they basically lost funding?
No, we actually, in 2015, we actually receed more funding.
You did? Okay.
But what we did with that was we looked to fund some different programs in 2015 when that came around. So the proportion that we put towards the hatchery programs stayed around the same.
Okay.
But instead what we funded, we started funding fisheries committee projects. So it's a joint Freshwater Fisheries Society and the BC provincial government staff members. They get together a couple times a year and look at priority projects that need some research done around them across the province, and as a committee decide which projects are going to be funded. And so it's not just stocked fisheries anymore. It can also be completely wild recreational fisheries. So as long as it has a recreational value, we're funding research for those programs now as well.
Okay, wow. That's great. And just to be clear, your organization oversees the freshwaters of all of British Columbia.
We oversee so we're a service provider to the provincial government.
Okay.
So the provincial government still maintains the management of the freshwater fisheries.
Yeah. And what would be examples of what are things that get managed?
So they actually decide how many fish are stocked into a lake.
Oh, I see.
So it's a discussion between ourselves and the provincial biologists each year. So obviously there's going to be capacity issues. We can't grow an unlimited supply of fish, but they decide how many fish go into which lakes.
Okay.
In all honesty, it doesn't change huge much from year to year.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are deciding. So if there's drought conditions, they're the ones that are going to decide that a river should be closed. They're the ones deciding what the regulations are on those water bodies.
Okay.
What we do is we grow the trout, cutthroat, kokanee for recreational fisheries programs. We also, as part of our service contract, we also grow sturgeon.
Oh.
For part of the recovery program for white sturgeon and the Chaco, and also the Kootenai.
Really?
Or the Columbia River.
So when you say grow, are we talking about you literally have little baby fish that are in small tanks and they grow and they get into bigger tanks and bigger tanks?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So little baby sturgeon are pretty cool looking, actually.
Are they really?
Yeah.
And by the way, Ross, while we're going, can you get, if you scroll near the bottom, so by the way, folks, for those of you watching this is a gofishbc.com.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's your website.
Yep.
And if we go to the bottom here, Ross, you'll see there's annual report in the bottom left corner there. I just like to be able to tie in the financial side of this so people can kind of understand what kind of money's being spent. So if you scroll down a bit, Ross, probably about 3/4 of the way down, you'll find when you pull it up. And I think I saw research and development itself was last year about almost like $750,000 spent on R&D.
Yeah, so we have a sort of a combination. So the Fisheries Technical Committee funding that I was talking about earlier, that's a joint decision between the province and ourselves as to which projects are getting funded. And then we also spend money on our own research and development into the stocks of fish that we're releasing.
Okay.
So essentially trying to make sure that we are growing better fish for the recreational fisheries program. So what size do we put them in at? There could be a difference in how well they survive depending on the size that we're putting them in at. And then also just knowing that we've got a changing climate and environment that a lot of these fish are going into. We've been doing research into, so a lot of lakes, especially in the interior, are becoming more acidic over time.
Are they really?
So,
and this,
not more acidic, more basic over time.
More basic, okay.
The pH is increasing, and so
and is this a result of climate change in your view?
So when you're not having as much flushing, so if you're having less rainfall or lower snowpack, those water bodies receive less flushing, and the water levels and some of them are actually going down slowly. They fluctuate from year to year, but so changing pH also impacts how well fish survive. And so we're looking at ways that maybe within the way that we transport the fish or grow the fish, that we can ensure that they will continue to survive in some of the lakes that we're releasing them in. So we partner with universities and grad students and researchers to also
which universities are active in bringing out smart students in this space? Is it?
We're doing a really interesting project right now with Genome BC.
Okay.
So a number of students from University of British Columbia.
Yeah.
And then Genome Canada is also involved in the project. So I think we've got, I'm going to get in trouble for this one, but I think it's maybe Carleton. We've got a few universities that have specific lab capabilities that we're dealing with in the East.
Yeah.
And we've been involved in projects with grad students from Simon Fraser University as well, looking at different angler demographics and how anglers are moving across the landscape. So it's
wow.
Yeah.
There's, I'm sure, a lot of science to this.
There certainly is.
Yeah. Well, here we are. Maybe we can just increase this a little bit. Yep. So we're talking about the lower part here on program costs. So research, you can make that a little bit bigger there, Ross, please. So $743,000. So, and we see the bulk of this, 37% is spent on recreational stocking program. Yep. So when you were mentioning earlier about growing those fish, is that part of that equation?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then the conservation and restoration, so that's the conservation program. A lot of that is so things like growing sturgeon. So our Nechako hatchery is exclusively a sturgeon hatchery.
Oh, wow.
And then we also grow sturgeon in out of our Kootenai trout hatchery.
Okay.
Also grows.
And just for folks to know, like sturgeon, they're big fish.
They grow to an incredibly large size.
Yeah. That's where you get caviar from, right?
That's right. Yeah. So there's actually a sturgeon hatchery for growing fish for food production on the Sunshine Coast. So if you're eating BC caviar, it's probably from that location. Yeah.
Wow. Is it like a caviar farm? A sturgeon farm? Is it like it's effectively a farm? Okay. I mean, what we should, if we have time, talk about fish farming. I think it's an important topic because there's lots of controversy around that, and I think there's also a lot of misunderstandings. I know personally myself, I try to avoid farmed fish. Maybe it's because I've been, lucky enough to grow up on wild fish. Yep. But that being said, I eat farmed chicken. Yep. So maybe I should change my view on it. But is there such thing as fish farming in fresh waters? Does that exist?
In fresh waters? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So there are fish farms that are completely inland.
Inland. Yeah. Right. But when you say inland, are they on tanks or are they actually in like lakes and ponds and rivers?
So there's a little bit of there's sort of the whole gamut. So you can buy, so if you have say a large piece of property and you've got your own little lake or on it, you can actually get a permit from the provincial government to purchase trout, not from us, because we only provide trout for provincial program. Yeah. But there's a couple of trout farms in BC that you can purchase trout from and put them into your own pond if you have a permit.
Really?
And then they also grow trout, and they will you can buy smoked trout that are from one of the farms up by Little Fort. And
wow, oh, that's really neat.
Yeah, and those ones are growing in, from what I understand, it's more of an actual lake on someone's property.
Okay. Man, we could go on for hours. This is so fun. So, Stacy, let's talk about sturgeon a little bit more here, because I find this. I've never gone sturgeon fishing, but I've seen those pictures of these monster beasts, and I understand that. I mean, as I understand it, sturgeon is kind of a rare species of fish these days, is it not? Isn't it kind of an endangered fish?
So they are, depending on the population in BC as to how protected they are or not. So what the status of the population is. So in the lower Fraser River, you can go sturgeon fishing.
Yes.
And that's because at this time, the provincial government, the managers, have determined that the population is healthy enough to allow some recreational fishing. The majority of the guides that you would go out with, they are part of a program where they're actually tracking sturgeon. So if you were to, say, be on a boat and catch one of these fish, they'll scan it for a pit tag. And they'll be able to, from that information, they'll know when that fish was last caught, when it was originally tagged, and if the fish has not been caught before, they will actually tag it. So you're part of a study while you're out there fishing for it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Put them on a blockchain. So you mentioned about one of the things you grow are sturgeon for two rivers, the Nechako River.
The Nechako,
Nechako.
Yeah.
And the...
And then so in the Kootenays, we used to grow fish for the Kootenai and the Columbia system.
Okay.
The Kootenai tribe of Idaho, I believe, is what they built the hatchery. So they now grow sturgeon in the United States.
Yes.
We still grow some sturgeon in smaller numbers, but we still grow sturgeon for the Columbia system as well. And so there's a larger body that's looking at all the current research and data and deciding how many fish are released each year. And a lot of those fish that we're growing now are actually, the eggs are being collected from the wild, and then we're just giving them a boost and growing them in the hatchery to a certain size, and then letting the fish go. So.
Oh wow! And so how many sturgeon annually? We should pull up a picture of what a sturgeon looks like, so people are watching this, they can see. Oh, you got it right here. How many sturgeon are being released annually, roughly? Do you have any idea what that number is?
So at the back end of our annual report, it says it varies from year to year. So we used to release more, and the last number of years we're releasing fewer of them. And so and at different sizes because they know that even the size they were being released, they were still being predated upon.
They were what? Sorry.
So there's other creatures that are still eating them if they're small.
Oh, I see. Right.
The river otters were finding them.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
So
how long do sturgeon live for? Don't they live for a long time?
They can live for over 100 years, and so
Wow.
they don't become mature to lay eggs and reproduce until they're like 13, 15 years old. So they need to be in the river for quite a few years.
So how old are these sturgeon when you guys are releasing them?
So the ones that we're releasing are only usually a year or so old.
So they're not like 5 or 6 years old.
No, we're releasing. I mean, they're like this size, but
I see.
And so the water bodies that we're releasing, or that we're raising sturgeon for, they were impacted from different. Mostly these are dam systems.
Yes.
And so they don't know exactly. They're still looking at all of the causes of why the fish were no longer reproducing, but they kind of realized, we're missing a whole young age class of fish.
Yeah.
And so while they're working on different ways to mitigate that so that the population can continue to spawn and do what it's meant to do to reproduce, we're sort of helping in the meantime by growing juvenile sturgeon and releasing them.
Okay. And we see the numbers here. So nearly 8,000 juvenile Nechako white sturgeon were released into the Nechako River. And then just over 1,000 in the Upper Columbia River. Wow, that's fascinating. So how many different types of fish species is the Freshwater Fisheries Society looking after?
So primarily we raise rainbow trout.
Okay.
We also raise kokanee, which are a landlocked sockeye salmon.
Yeah.
And then we also raise cutthroat trout.
Okay.
Mostly west slope cutthroat for the interior, for the kootenays, where they're native. And then we also release eastern brook trout, which are actually a char.
Okay, a char. Okay, yeah. And those are up north? I mean...
So those are actually not native to BC.
Okay.
And so when we release them as sterile fish, so they cannot reproduce.
Oh, so why do you raise them in the first place?
So there's sort of a history. They were originally brought to BC by the provincial government because it was believed that they would survived lakes that had low oxygen over the winter, that they did better in those lakes, and people like the taste of them. And so it's debatable as to whether or not they survive through lower oxygen levels in the wintertime, which a lot of interior lakes will, people have heard of winter kill. And so when the oxygen levels get really low, then sometimes you have fish kills, usually not all of them, but it was believed that the fish would survive those conditions better.
I see.
And so it's sort of a hangover that we continue to do it. People really like catching that species of fish. They're really beautiful. They taste great.
What are they called again?
They are called eastern brook trout.
Eastern brook trout.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a quick look at what those look like.
Yeah, so they've got lighter spotting on them, sort of pretty rainbow, sort of haloed effect to them.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, this is very famous looking kind of fish, yeah.
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 Yeah. So if you're fishing
what rivers will we find these in, or which lakes?
So we stock them into lakes.
Lakes, yeah.
And mostly in the Caribou and Thompson Nicola.
Yeah.
So if you were to fish some of the lakes around Merritt, a number of them are stocked with brook trout. And a lot of lakes we stock with brook trout and also rainbow trout.
Okay. Now, one fish you didn't mention at all is salmon.
Yep.
And I have to say, I'm kind of surprised. I assumed that we would talk a lot about salmon, but so you guys aren't responsible for stocking salmon at all?
No. So salmon, stocking, growing, and release and management of salmon is federal responsibility.
Okay.
So most of the salmon in BC are grown at federal fish hatcheries.
Yes.
And then there's also a number of community-run hatcheries as well.
Okay.
That
So that's where we were talking earlier about the Robertson Fish Hatchery that I would go to as a kid for field trips in Port Alberni.
That one might be. I don't know. Yeah, I'd have to double check on that.
You're thinking maybe it's a volunteer, but that's not run by yourselves.
No.
Because that's for salmon.
Yeah.
What about steelhead?
Sorry, I totally forgot to mention steelhead. So we also grow steelhead.
Okay.
As well. The steelhead are an interesting one because also the federal fisheries, they also grow some steelhead. Okay. So we grow and release steelhead into just a small number of rivers in the around Chilliwack. Yes. The Vetter, which we were talking about earlier, that your father-in-law fished. Yeah. So the steelhead that we do grow and release, that the society does, those are for systems that are purely managed for a recreational fishery for steelhead. They're not grown for any sort of conservation reason. Okay. There's been a lot of research that shows when it comes to steelhead that introducing hatchery fish to water bodies where steelhead numbers are low doesn't necessarily give the results that you are hoping for.
What do you mean by that?
There's a number of different factors as to why there might be a shortage of, or why there's less steelhead in a river system. In a lot of systems, it's looking like ocean survival is a big factor as to why.
Because steelhead travel into the ocean.
So they go out to the ocean.
Just to be clear for people again.
Sorry, yeah. So
for those of us who don't,
So steelhead, so salmon will come back and they will spawn throughout the fall and the winter, right? Okay. And they spawn once, they die. Yeah. That's the end of their life cycle. Whereas steelhead, they'll travel out to the ocean as juveniles. They'll smolt out to the ocean. They'll spend a few years out in the ocean. Then they'll come back to the river system. They come back in the wintertime, and in most water bodies, they're actually spawning in the spring, like rainbow trout. Right. Because there are a rainbow trout that goes to the ocean.
Don't steelhead actually feed off of salmon eggs in the wintertime? So I don't know if that's true or not, but I've heard that.
I mean, there's some debate as to whether they're even doing much feeding at all once they get into the water bodies or into the rivers.
Into the rivers,
so rainbow trout certainly will. Oh, okay. Rainbow trout will gorge on salmon eggs as they float down the river. Right.
So the steelhead spawn.
They spawn in the spring. Okay. During freshet, so as the water levels are really starting to rise. Yeah. And but
then they don't die.
They don't necessarily die. Yeah. So then they try to journey back to the ocean. Okay. And they can, in theory, come back again. So some of these fish are going thousands of kilometers just to make it to their spawning grounds. Yeah. So their chance of making it back again are pretty slim. Yeah. But once they're finished, they will head back down the river. Huh. So you can't go along and count all the dead ones and know how many spawned.
I see.
In that
is that what you do?
System.
Is that part of the process?
As part of the federal program, of counting and enumerating salmon, they will actually walk along water bodies and do dead pitch, and so they'll actually count.
What do they call it?
Dead pitch, because you're pitching the dead ones onto the shore. Yeah. So steelhead, I think one of the limiting factors is their ocean survival. Okay. So if you're adding more hatchery fish, then you're just putting more fish that are competing for limited resources, right? So
I see.
It's not necessarily going to be a good thing for the wild fish that are trying to survive. And the other thing is that with a hatchery system, you don't have the same type of natural selection that you do in the wild. Right. Right?
Sure.
So we have a really nice controlled environment. So there's obviously going to be a little bit of mortality in that nice controlled environment, but majority of the fish that we raise are going to live. Right. Whereas in the wild, it's really the strongest and the fittest that are going to survive, right? So,
which is important, I'm assuming, because if you don't have that over time, you have a weaker and weaker population base. And
you could. Yeah.
Or you could, okay.
Yeah. So,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's, I mean, it's when it comes to steelhead, it's complicated.
Sure.
The other thing that's interesting with steelhead is that they're the steelhead juveniles. So when they emerge as young fish, they can decide to not go back to the ocean. So they can decide to spend their entire life in the river.
In the river. Yeah.
So we know that some of those fish do not choose to go back to the ocean.
Right.
Because some of the rivers are, they're nice, productive environments, so they'll stay there too. So.
Yeah. Now, even though you don't raise salmon, I'm assuming salmon have got to be one of the major species that your anglers catch. Is it not?
So
it depends on where they're fishing.
Yeah, it depends. So we definitely know that freshwater anglers love to catch salmon. Mm-hmm. It's when there are salmon fishing opportunities in rivers in the fall. People love that because it's easy and accessible, right? You don't have to have an ocean boat.
Yes.
And for a lot of people, it's their opportunity to actually catch a salmon. And
I have to admit, I converted like about 6 years ago when my father-in-law got me out on the river, because I'd done lots of ocean fishing as a teenager and a kid. And you sit in the back of this boat, sucking in diesel air and eating potato chips and waiting for that line to hit. And then even when it hits, you're reeling in this just dead weight because there's probably some big, weight on the end of the line, flasher and all that kind of stuff. Then you get out into the river and it's active and you're moving and it's a line super light. So when that fish hits, I mean, even though it might only be 10 pounds, man, it feels like you're battling a monster.
Yep.
And you're right too. It's like if you get lucky, you get the right day, the right conditions, you can literally see the fish.
Yeah.
Swimming up the river.
Yeah, and so people that live in Vancouver, when it's salmon season and if there's openings, you can go up to, a lot of people drive up to Squamish. The pink salmon runs have been really popular for anglers up around Squamish. This year, they didn't have, it was interesting, they did a catch and release pink salmon fishery. They determined the numbers weren't healthy enough to allow people to retain the pink salmon, but you could go and catch and release them this year.
Yeah.
And then all of the tributaries coming into the Lower Fraser, Harrison, Vedder, all of those water bodies as well. You can fish for salmon along those. And then, if anybody drives along Highway 1 out past Hope and the salmon fisheries are open, you can tell, right? There's all these cars parked along the side of the highway and you can see the anglers along the Fraser River.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. So while the salmon are not species that you raise, you do have anglers that fish them. Does the Freshwater Fisheries Society of BC have any involvement with salmon in the sense of do you do any research and development with salmon? Do you do any counts of salmon? Do you work with DFO in any way with respect to salmon, or they're just naturally one of the many fish that anglers catch in freshwaters?
So we aren't involved at all with any of the management of salmon in BC. That's entirely federal government.
Yeah.
We certainly do though see when salmon season. When river fisheries open for salmon, we certainly see an increase in the number of people that buy a freshwater fishing license. Right. So we know that there are some people that's the only type of freshwater fishing that they do.
Yeah. I'm one of them.
But we do help. We have a new initiative that we started about I think we're into just the end of our first year actually. And it's the wild trout initiative. So community groups. Right now, if you want to help with salmon or recreational fisheries, there's a lot of community groups that are funded through the Pacific Salmon Foundation,
right? For
salmon work. Well, we started one that's more of a trout focus. So groups that want to say restore or improve trout habitat.
Yes.
But a lot of that habitat, especially on the coast, coastal cutthroat habitat is also salmon habitat, right? So a lot of those groups that are working to improve and restore stream habitat.
Yes. For trout.
It's helping not just trout, not just salmon. It's helping all of the species that would use that habitat. So.
Yeah. And what are the kind of things that those organizations would do? What are they're helping clear debris, or what are they doing?
Yeah. So in some instances, they might be working with, say, the city or a regional park to try and improve the natural flow of a creek or stream, removing large amounts of trash or debris, fixing, say, culverts that have become a barrier, just trying to, in general, make the stream habitat more accessible and more livable.
Yeah. Do they put any signs up for the fish? Welcome home.
And the other things that they're doing probably are a lot of bank stabilization too. So, in some of these urban or near urban areas, you might have well-used paths along the banks, but then you've got erosion that happens over time as well. So they probably are doing some riparian planting, and so basically anything that's going to improve the habitat. Yeah, we will. It's a brand new fund that we started last year. So I think there's about 5 or 6 groups that were funded this past year.
Oh, wow, that's really neat.
Yeah.
And I know the city of Vancouver has been big on trying to reopen these streams. Down in Jericho area, there's actually a sign that says, please don't have your children and dogs walk in the stream, because they're trying to attract salmon. I don't know if they've had any success with that or not yet, or any other fish for that. I'm not sure. Do you guys know anything of the details behind something like that?
No, okay. I don't know a whole lot of that. But one of the lakes that we stock in Vancouver is actually, there's a little pond in the grounds where the PNE is. So Hastings Park, there's a little lake that a lot of people don't even realize is there. If you're up on the top of the Ferris wheel, you'll actually, if you look over, you'll be able to see it. It's a beautiful little lake.
What's it called?
Sanctuary Pond.
Sanctuary Pond.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we started stocking that a couple of years ago. And the city of Vancouver has been working at improving the whole creek system that goes from, it's below the Hastings Park, but down to the ocean. So
really?
Yeah.
Can you pull up the map, Ross? Looks like there's some nice pictures here of this place. So are these catch and release, or are these?
Yeah. So we stock a number of little ponds and lakes around Vancouver, and so we put the fish. Most of the fish we put in and around the Lower Mainland, we put in at catchable size. Yeah. So by that, they're about half a pound or so.
Okay. How long would it take to get these? These are trout?
Yeah.
How long would it take to get a trout to that size?
Well, so with trout, if you feed them a lot, they'll grow faster. And if you warmer water as well. Okay. So when we're stocking them, they're about a year to a year and a half old. Depends. Okay. So probably more.
And is this it here?
Yeah.
Stacy, just to be clear. So this is Hastings Park Sanctuary Small Pond. Yeah. Would this be a good place to take my 3 young kids to go fishing, or you have to be pretty skilled still at?
Well, I would say that, so these water bodies are really popular. And there's a dock on the north end, so you can't really see, but the north end is where they have a little dock, and that's where they want people to fish from. Yeah. So that one, Rice Lake, is another one in North Vancouver that we stock as well. It's got a bigger dock system, and you can actually walk all the way around the lake and fish from it. If you live out in Coquitlam, we stock Lafarge Lake in City Center Park. Okay. And also Como Lake, which is in Como Park as well. And what else do we stock around? I'm probably forgetting another one. But all of those water bodies, we stock them in the spring. Okay. And then in the fall. And we'll stock them multiple times. Yeah. Because there's so many people fishing on them that the fish are getting pulled out fairly quickly. But if you've got young kids and you want to take them fishing, I would highly recommend looking into one of our Learn to Fish programs.
Oh, you have that?
We run about 900 programs across the province each year.
Really?
So we run those out of municipal and regional parks.
Okay. Is that on your website, by the way?
Yeah. So the Learn to Fish program there.
Yeah.
We run those out of regional, municipal, and provincial parks. Okay. Starting in majority of them are running spring through the summertime.
Yeah.
So I think we did over 100 different locations last year.
What's the nearest one to if you're living in Vancouver?
If you're living in Vancouver, we've been doing them at Rice Lake. It's drop-in.
Yeah.
And so we have an events calendar, and people can look and see which lakes near them we're running programs.
Yeah.
Or a lot of people will do a program if they're out at a provincial park in the summer. Camping, we do a lot of programs at the provincial parks as well. So
is it only for kids, or
so it's geared at kids ages 5 to 15.
Yeah.
Once you turn 16, you need a fishing license.
Right, of course.
So then it just makes it a little bit simpler, because in some places there's not great internet.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't necessarily buy a license if you hadn't thought about it.
Yeah.
But we parents or guardians are required to come along, because as you can imagine, if you have 20, 25 kids all learning how to fish,
all leaning over a dock.
It's also really important that the parents understand all the steps for going fishing as well, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
we teach the basics of
Well, if the kids are going to this course, it's probably because the parents don't know how to fish.
That's right. Yeah,
right?
For the most part, right? And so we're teaching you like what species you can target.
Yeah.
A bit about the ethics of angling and making sure you're handling the fish, appropriately. And then we do some basic casting, usually on a nice sort of open area, and show them how to tie the hook on the whole bit. And then they usually have a half an hour to an hour or so to practice casting into the lake at the end of the lesson.
Yeah.
So it's about a 2-hour program for most of our drop-in ones.
Yeah.
And then we also run some out of our Fraser Valley Trout Hatchery. So if you want to do a little day trip out to Abbotsford, it's about an hour to get there from Vancouver.
Yeah.
You need to pre-register for those programs, but most of those are about an hour or about 4 hours long. They can be up to 4 hours long, so they're much more intensive. You get a tour of the hatchery, and you can fish for longer. And then once you've done that program, you can often also then sign up for just drop it and come back. And we stock that lake with our pond at our hatchery. We stock with so many fish that it's a very good chance.
Really?
Even you can catch a fish.
And what's that one called again, Stacy? That's in Abbotsford?
Yeah, so our Fraser Valley Trout Hatchery.
Fraser Valley Trout Hatchery.
Yeah. And it's really close to the Eco Dairy, so if you want to make a whole day trip of it or go to the pumpkin patch or something like that as well. So highly recommend it.
And you said that you stock them twice a year, so this is not just a program available in the spring, or it's all...
Yeah, so we're stocking the lakes actually multiple times but we stock them in the spring and the fall when the water temperatures are optimal.
Oh yeah, okay.
So in our and on our website, we have a stocking tool.
Okay.
And so people can look and see when we last stocked the lake closest to them, how many fish we put in, which species we put in. So
I can imagine the real advocates are ones they're checking in every day and like, it just got stocked. I'm heading over there tomorrow.
Yeah, and if you sign up for our newsletter, so on our homepage at the bottom, we have a newsletter. People
Let's do the plug. This is a good time for the plug. So
people can sign up for our newsletter at the bottom there of our footer of any page. And so once in the spring, when we start stocking, especially these urban lakes in the Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island, we will update the newsletter as well as with what's been recently stocked. So, if the real avids are checking our website daily, and we will also post it on our social media sites, but our newsletter, which we send out probably every 2 weeks during prime sort of spring, summer fishing season.
Yeah.
We identify which lakes have been stocked with catchables, because those are the lakes where you can go and catch fish right away, right?
Yeah.
Most of the lakes that we stock, the majority of them though, we're putting in little tiny fish that need at least a year to grow.
Right. So if you're catching fish from there, they would have been fish that were maybe stocked there a year or two ago.
Yeah.
And you just have a constant.
Yeah. Some of the interior lakes, so when she gets around Kamloops, Merritt, the southern Caribou, those lakes are so productive that we can actually stock some of those ones in the spring with small fish with yearling size fish, and they will be. People can catch them in the fall. They'll grow that fast in some of those water bodies.
What do they eat?
They're eating insects.
Just bugs?
For the most part, yeah. Once fish, some of the rainbow trout, there's one of the, so we stock a few different strains of rainbow trout. So it's
Okay.
not just a generic rainbow trout that we stock. We have different strains of rainbow trout that we stock. And so the one strain's called Blackwater. They're originally from the Blackwater River.
Okay.
And once they get to a certain size, they will start eating small fish as well. So lakes that say maybe have red-side shiner or a little other species of fish,
Yeah.
they'll start eating those as well. And so
wow.
then they get
big
fast.
fast.
Yeah. But for
Yeah.
the most part, rainbow trout are eating insects.
Insects.
Yeah.
Wow. This is amazing.
Yeah.
So let's maybe switch gears for a second and talk about financials.
Sure.
It's my world that I
Yeah.
spend every day in, and I always love analyzing organizations and their financials because I think it tells you a lot about how things are going.
Yeah.
And this last fiscal year, you guys actually had a deficit of
Yep.
almost $700,000. And from talking to a couple of your colleagues before this, I understand that there's two challenges you face. One is kind of a flat line in the number of anglers that are buying annual licenses. So I'd love to talk a bit about, why is that happening? Why is that not, because the population base is growing. And then the second is just the increasing costs for you to run these programs because you have just natural inflation.
Yep.
And I believe if I'm correct in asking my father-in-law, you haven't done an increase in license fees in a long time.
I don't remember the exact number of years, but it's been quite a few years.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about that as well. That's maybe the solution. So let's start talking first of all about the numbers. You mentioned earlier, I think before we started filming. So why don't you speak a little bit about how many people are registering, buying licenses? Sure. What does that break down? How many are British Columbians versus Canadians versus foreigners?
Yep. So in the about mid-1990s was probably when we had peak number of people that were recreational freshwater fishing in British Columbia. So we had over 400,000 licensed anglers in the 1990s. And then there was sort of a slow decline. In 2003, when we became the Freshwater Fisheries Society, we were close to our lowest point. So not a great time to become a not-for-profit when your main funding source is decreasing. And there are a lot of avid anglers that were also concerned about the fact that there was less people taking up the sport. So I looked at a number of different initiatives to try and turn things around. So one of the things that we started doing was looking at marketing recreational fishing and providing, resources to make it easier for anglers to go fishing. So providing fishing tips and, improving our website, started up the Learn to Fish program, improving angler access, whatever we could do to try and make fishing more accessible. And so as a result of that, we've seen a slow and steady increase in the number of anglers. Around 2005 or so, we started slowly seeing an increase. But over the last 4 or 5 years, it's really sort of flattened out. It sort of, bumps up or down a little bit from year to year, but we're looking at about 350 to 360,000 licensed freshwater anglers per year.
Okay. Any idea why this is happening? What the reasons are?
There's probably a number of different reasons. So for one, we know that we've got an aging demographic in BC. So we've got, baby boomers who were probably that big cohort that were fishing in the 1990s.
I was going to say, I wonder if that's a big. This reminds me of this book that you probably wouldn't remember, Ross. You're too young, but I don't know if you remember a book that you're probably maybe too young too. But it was a book called Boom, Bust, and Echo by David Foote. He was a professor at University of Toronto, and he talked about the demographic change and how it's going to affect things like the tennis industry or golf, because people would stop playing tennis in their 20s and then they switch to golf or whatever. And I wonder if that's a factor.
So it potentially, it probably very likely is, because we did see for a number of years the average age of an angler was slowly inching up. But over the last few years, we've actually started to see that average age come down. So we've got now this next.
The millennials.
The millennials.
The millennials on board.
Coming through, that's right. So the millennials, they're also now a large demographic, right?
Yeah.
And so
they're huge. They're bigger than the baby boomers.
and so some of them are starting.
But they don't like
to
to
go
get
fishing.
dirty.
Well, they have lots of interests, right? And so many choices.
Yes. Got to figure out how to make Instagram selfies a thing in fishing, and then
and so we definitely know that, they like to go out and catch their own food.
yeah, sure.
So and get their own food. So that's great. A lot of people are doing that.
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, he started like killing his own animals.
Yeah, so a lot of people really like they like to understand where their food came from. So
Yeah.
if you're out and you've caught your own fish, and
Yeah.
we certainly, from a recreational freshwater side,
yeah,
if you go fishing, I would say if you want to keep fish, go as long as you're staying within the regulation state that you can keep.
Sure.
I mean, those regulations are in place to manage that fishery properly.
make
So
it
if it's
sustainable.
so you can go ahead and don't feel guilty if you want to eat those fish
Yeah.
that you caught. Go right ahead.
Depends on what you're fishing, right? I mean, steelhead is maybe one.
Yes, no. So steelhead, it says that you can't. You got to follow the rules,
Yeah.
the regulations
Yeah.
as to what water body you're in and what you can keep.
Yeah.
So when it comes to rainbow trout and
Yeah.
kokanee,
Lots of them out there.
lots. And we're stocking them so that people can
Yeah.
keep them.
Yeah.
But the other thing too is that a lot of us now live in urban centers, right? People
Yes.
lived in more rural locations,
Yeah.
and everyone's short on time.
Yeah.
And a lot of us are living in smaller houses.
Right.
So where do you put a boat?
Right.
Right?
Good point. Yeah. Any idea of the 300,000 anglers you have? How many of them actually use a boat versus just stand on the side of a river or a dock?
Probably a large portion of them
Yeah.
are river anglers.
Yeah.
We do know, though, that, I mean, this year, talking to people who have fished interior southern BC lakes for years, they did say that they felt like there was a new group of people that were fishing the lakes that had invested in some boats. And so if you live out in the Fraser Valley,
Yeah.
a lot of people there have room to store a boat.
Yeah.
People in Kamloops and Kelowna, like there's lots of places outside
Yeah.
of Vancouver where people do have room to store these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Or people are fishing from stand-up paddle boards, or you have,
I saw the coolest video of Bombardier has their line of Sea-Doos, and they've got one that's for fishing.
Yeah.
It's wild. Have you seen this thing?
I can fully believe it. Yeah.
You should pull the video. This thing's like, it's crazy. I mean, it's like $25,000.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why you would just buy a boat.
Yep.
But this thing's wild. It's got a cooler on it and stuff. It's unbelievable. In the video they've put together, and then Bombardier, here it is. It's not ice fishing, just fishing. Yeah, fishing. It's like a sea-doo.
Those are interesting too.
Yeah.
Or people will have little float tubes as well.
Yes.
And so for those are great if you want to get a true wilderness experience, drive for a few hours into the interior, hike into a little lake and with your float tube and be in complete peace and serenity, listen to the loons. People love doing that as well. So
yeah. Do you stock any lakes or ponds up on your way to Whistler or up in Whistler?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
There's that little lake that I think you kind of pass as you get past Lions Bay and everything, kind of past Squamish, and you kind of.
Yeah. So there's a lake, Murin Park, just before you get into Squamish. On the left-hand side, we stock that one.
Yes.
And then there's another one that's really hard to see from the highway, but it's as you're heading from Squamish towards Whistler as well. There's a little lake on the left that we stock as well. And then we stock lakes in Whistler as well. So Lost Lake, Alta Lake, we stock all of those.
Yeah.
And then there's a number of lakes that are more accessible, say, by foot, or you need a four-wheel drive vehicle as well around Whistler.
Right.
Lakes as you go further up towards Pemberton as well. So anyone who's been up in that part of the... And, people... when we looked a number of years back at, by population, where we had the most anglers, a lot of people in Squamish fish.
Really?
It's there's a lot of. I mean, it's got a young, active group of people who do everything.
Yeah,
right?
sure. Yeah, absolutely. I could see that for sure. Here it is, by the way. Look at this thing. This is, what do they call this? They call it their
Fish Pro.
The Fish Pro. Yeah. Look at this. It's unbelievable. It's a whole nother league there. Okay, so let's go back to those numbers, Stacy. So you figured that one of the reasons that number is kind of flatlined is because of this aging demographic and the baby boomers who just, some have passed on or some are just too, it's too hard for them to fish. I know my father-in-law himself has said it's getting harder and harder for him just to tie knots in his lines and whatnot.
Yeah, to get
that's right.
Climbing in and out of a boat and
his knees
maybe
are getting sore.
Scrambling along the side of a river. I get it. That gets a little. That would certainly get tricky.
Yeah. Any other reasons why you think? Let's use another example. That a reason I didn't fish this year was simply that the rivers were closed. And again, I'm not salmon fisherman primarily. So my buddies and I normally do that trip out to the island for the summertime. They try and go in June and September. Yeah. Try and hit up I think it's the sockeye run in June and then the coho in September. Yeah. But the rivers were closed for most of that time in both of those. So we didn't end up going, which means we didn't buy a license. Yep. Is that another factor, do you think?
Certainly. And I think another part of it too is that, so all you heard in the news this summer as well was about how terrible
there's no fish.
Yes, there was no fish, right?
Yeah, that's the headline, no fish.
So that gets into the mindset of people. Yeah. So even if they weren't planning on fishing for salmon, it's still, I think people had the impression that BC was closed to fishing, unfortunately. So we certainly...
I have to admit that I'm in that camp. Yeah. I'm glad we're having this conversation because even though I am primarily looking to go out to fish salmon, it never occurred to me that my buddies and I could just, we could go up to Whistler or something like that and have to learn a different way to fish. I mean, we don't even have our own gear. We have to use a guide. But that's maybe, I need to figure out this learn to fish. I'm going to take my kids as an excuse so that I can learn.
Yeah, well, we've got all sorts of fishing tips on our website as well. Yeah. So,
do you have an estimated cost of what it would cost somebody who doesn't want to invest in a boat, but a young guy like Ross who wants to have a different experience, especially if they grew up in the city and they want to be out and they want to just make a quick 2 hour to 2 hour drive, whether it's out to the valley to Abbotsford or up to towards Squamish and just hit one of these lakes or a river and stand on a dock. Yep. What would be the cost to get into something like that? So for
a basic spinning rod, like you could probably get set up with a basic spinning rod and some simple gear for under $50.
Really?
Yeah. If you went into your local tackle shop, I would definitely recommend going into one of the tackle shops and talking to the people because they'll set you up and they know, right?
Yeah. No knock against Canadian Tire, but I mean, like, you kind of...
the people that are working in those shops, they're out fishing as well, right? On their days off. Yeah. And they've got people coming in all the time telling them about, their best kept secrets. Yeah.
I know before we finish, I want to do what people hate about fishing and the people that are good at it is like, where's the best spot? Where, if I want to go catch fish, give me my 3 best locations.
Yeah. But the other thing too, if they don't even want to invest in any equipment and just want to try it, we do a free rod loan program. So you can go to our hatchery or any one of our hatcheries, or I think we've got over 13 visitor centers locations across BC. You can go in and you can borrow a basic spinning rod, and we'll give you a little tackle box, and you can go out and try it for free. All you got to do is buy your fishing license.
No way.
And at a few of the locations.
Okay, so again, if you're in Vancouver, where are those nearest locations?
So in Vancouver, probably the closest location would be if you were to go to Surrey.
Yes.
You can go to Green Timbers. They have Green Timbers Park. They have a nature center to the side of it, and they've got they loan out rods that we provided them.
Really?
From there. Yeah.
You know where that is, Ross? You grew up in Surrey.
I did. My uncle organized. I think it was called Fishing for Friends or something like that, and it was like it was pretty fun. You go out and there's a bunch of like special needs kids that want to learn how to fish. So we'd go like fish with them. I think it might have been right at that location. There's a little pond that they stock there. Yep. And they did an extra stock the day before, so everyone would make sure they were catching fish. It was really fun. Super fun. Yeah,
so that's probably the Fishing Forever, I think is
that's
what they call
it.
Yeah. And so they've started doing the program out of our hatchery pond out at Abbotsford now as well.
Yeah. I did that twice. It was really fun.
Yeah. So that would be probably the closest location from Vancouver, or they could drive out to our hatchery. And we also do learn to fish programs for adults. It's not just for kids.
You do.
So you can check out our website, watch the events calendar, and we do programs for adults as well.
I've got a team of roughly 22 people that work here.
Yep.
And I'll bet you at least 3/4 of them have never fished before.
Wow.
And I think it'd be such a fun team event to do.
That would be great.
That would be
super fun.
really fun. Yeah. Neat.
Yeah. Well, should make a trip out to the hatchery. And You guys can go fish around the pond.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Let's go back to that annual report for a second here. So we talked about why you think some of the numbers have kind of flatlined.
Yeah.
Obviously, a $700,000 deficit is not sustainable. I'm going to speak here just a moment for the cost to buy a license and kind of give you my 2 cents. So, and we can just pull this up here. So this is under the Province of BC website. Now, who decides how much these licenses are? Is it yourselves or the province?
No. So the provincial government sets the prices.
They do.
Yeah. And they're also responsible for selling the licenses as well. So we receive the revenue from them.
Yeah.
But we do not sell the licenses.
Well, this is why when you were going back earlier, you were saying that you got 70% of the revenue and then you went to 100%.
Yes.
And that was where you got the bump that year.
Yep. Yeah.
I see.
And then the other group, so there's also a conservation surcharge fee that is on some of the products. And then the other group that receives funds is the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation.
Okay.
And so they fund a lot of fisheries research projects as well.
Okay. Okay. So the province of BC.
Yeah.
And so what ministry is this under? Do you know?
So this would be under Ministry of Forest, Lands, Natural Resource Operations.
Okay.
And Rural Development.
Who that MLA is? I'm gonna have to
rural development.
And rural
Rural
development. Okay. Well, we'll figure out who that MLA is later, and maybe I'll be reaching out to that MLA. Maybe before we're finished, you can find that out for me, Ross. So here's the pricing. So if you're buying an annual license as a resident, we won't even get into like what the definition between resident and non-resident is, but just to make this simple. So it's $36 for an annual license.
Yep. 365 days of fishing.
That's amazing. I mean, like that's like not even $1. It's not even, that's like 10 cents a day. But more importantly, a single day license is $10, an 8-day license is $20. And then the part that my father-in-law wants me to mention as a 71-year-old is he thinks it's crazy that as a senior, he only has to pay $5. And so this is one thing he wanted me to pass on. He said, the seniors are the ones who probably can afford this the most. If they're fishing, they probably didn't just learn how to fish at 65. They've probably been fishing their whole lives. And if they can afford to fish, they probably can afford to pay the $36. He said, if you're going to give any kind of discount, give it to the young people, guys like Ross, who are trying to just get by in life right now, living at mom and dad's place still, or living with, in Ross's case, like 6 guys in a house. But give them the $5 license. Now, I know this is not you, but this is a shout out to, we'll find out who this is, the province of BC that runs this ministry. And obviously, if these fees were to go up, it would be very good for you guys. I mean, you're spending 36% of your revenue you get on restocking. Right. So I'm assuming that that's a good thing. Yeah.
Well, even more because we also invest in our hatchery program. So in the facilities and
facilities, which I think what the infrastructure is probably, it probably deteriorates, and there's probably a lot of expenses to upgrading facilities. And we've been
doing some upgrades to try and make our facilities more efficient. So that we're using less water, less energy.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we literally just had, yesterday, I think it was, we had Matt Horn from the city of Vancouver.
Yeah, I know Matt. Yep.
Oh, do you know Matt?
Yeah.
Okay.
He went to the same grad program as me.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah, Matt was great. All right, here we go. Doug Donaldson. All right, Doug,
Doug is a very nice man.
I'm sure he is. But we are calling you out, Doug, as you are the Minister of Forest, Lands, Natural Resource Operations, and Rural Development. So, Doug, my advice is let's increase these fees. My father-in-law, who's an avid lifelong fisherman, is advocating for it. So am I. Because when we look at the numbers, I mean, my father-in-law had a really good point. Now, he and I both don't like golf. We're not into golf. I think it's one of the reasons why we connected when I first met my wife. But he said, a round of golf is like $80 to $100. Is that right, Ross? You're a big golfer.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So he said, you're asking anglers to pay less than a round of golf for an entire year's worth of an annual license. And then on top of that, $36 is $25 for a Steelhead license and $15 for
which is totally optional. So if you don't want to catch Steelhead, don't buy that license.
But if you want the full meal deal, if you want to be able to catch, Steelhead, if you want to catch salmon, which he does, you're not even $80 into this thing. I think it was like,
and the salmon stamp, but you only purchase if you're fishing in non-tidal waters. So if you're fishing saltwater for salmon, it's federal.
Yeah, then you have to
license.
buy a federal
separate
license.
Yeah.
Which would be interesting to compare the two. Do you have any idea off the top of your head what the federal licenses are?
It's cheaper.
It's cheaper.
Yeah.
It's the tragedy of commons here. I don't know. We got to get this figured out. I'm not trying to say that fishing should become all of a sudden an elitist sport. That's not what I'm suggesting. But if you guys are running a deficit of $700,000, you're not seeing an increase in your angler base, or you are seeing a very slow increase through a lot of marketing dollars. And the price point to enter into this is so. I asked my father-in-law, I said, Jerry, if you had to pay, because he pays roughly about, I think we worked out, it was about $46, something like that per year. I said, if you had to pay double, would you still fish? I said, of course I would. He goes, I would still fish if it was 5 times that amount. I mean, I said, how much does a lure cost? Because he's losing tackle in the river all the time. He said, it's $7. That's not including tax. So you're almost $8 for a one lure.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure most avid anglers are going to lose quite a bit of lure through the course of a year. And for him to pay $5 as a senior, I agree with him. I think there needs to be a definite. Is there a review? How does this process work? Does it get reviewed on an annual basis? Do you know?
So not on an annual basis. We are, we did do a review and looked at license fees and have a proposal for some potentially different options as well for people. So you're talking about for young people starting out. Well, could we introduce something like a family license,
right?
Or a lot of people, the other thing that they would love is if they didn't have to renew each year, it just automatically renewed for them, right?
Right.
So those are all potential options that have been proposed to government.
Yeah.
But it's
sell a 5-year license.
Yeah. So there are some options.
Yeah.
With the current license system for the electronic license system, there are some restrictions on the flexibility of that current system as well. So being able to add new products is problematic. So yes, we're in discussion with government, but it hasn't. Nothing's happened to date, but we're optimistic.
Okay. Well, I know you don't want to make this political. I'm always happy to make things political without having to ask my guests to.
Well, and
the other thing too, I'll point out here is so like non-resident. And it's not that I have an issue with Americans or foreigners, but the part that really blows me away is, you guys as an organization, DFO, these nonprofit volunteer groups, there's a lot of Canadians who are putting their heart and soul into ensuring we have a sustainable fishing system. To turn around, and then Ross, if you can just pull that pricing chart up there, to turn around and allow a wealthy American or European or Japanese people to come visit here, and they only have to spend $80. In fact, probably most of them are not buying an annual license. They get an 8-day license for $50. These people are paying. They're paying. In some cases, if you look at great service, Murphy's Fishing Lodge out in Port Alberni, which I use, they're great guys, but I can guarantee you Murphy's is charging thousands of dollars for an 8-day guide on a non-tidal river, and we turn around and only charge $50.
Yeah, so depending on which river system they're fishing on, they may also have to purchase an additional classified waters license, or some other. If it's Steelhead, they'll have to purchase an additional license on top of that. But where we do get some money from those visitors that come from out of country.
Yes.
Because we also invest in a program called Fishing BC, so helping to promote BC as a fishing tourism destination. Yeah. So we do know that rural communities are where most of these people are going to go fishing.
Yeah,
and
they're creating employment.
They're creating employment because especially when it comes to people from out of country.
Yeah.
majority of them that come are using the services of a guide or a lodge or accommodation or something, right? So,
and I'm a big fan. Look, don't get me wrong. I'm a big fan of tourism.
Yeah.
I think it's actually. I think bringing in foreign dollars for tourism is probably one of the best economic policies that a government could embrace, because you're literally just bringing money in from outside of your country, and if it's sustainable tourism, that's phenomenal. All I'm saying is, I think it's crazy that, people will not stop coming if they have to go from paying $80 or $50 for an 8-day license to having to pay $250. That's the number I wrote up. I said, because I looked at the number and I said, right now, foreigners only pay $106 US, $100. And I can tell you for sure, if an American's coming up here, I remember seeing pictures of Donald Trump Jr. when he was doing a combo fishing hunting tour. You got to know that guy's paying tens of thousands of dollars. So for him to pay a little bit more, I think would go a long ways. So there's another suggestion for Minister Donaldson. And I love the golfing comparison. I think that's a great one. I think that's because there are a lot of people who probably fish and golf, and they can relate to the two.
Yep.
One of the questions that my father-in-law asked me to ask you, Stacy, is there a way in which, if he were to allocate a portion of his will to your society, is there a way he could do that? I mean, do you issue tax receipts or? So
we're not a charitable not-for-profit, but if somebody wanted to, say, make a donation to us and wanted a tax receipt.
Yes.
The way that we have been doing that is that we actually have a fund set up through the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation. So we work in close partnership with them on a number of projects. So I know that there have been some anglers that have done that, and some of them put in specific requests. So they wanted it to help make fishing more accessible, or something like that. So we have then used those funds in partnership with the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation, and maybe installed a dock in a new location, or helped fund more learn to fish programs.
I see.
So that's probably the easiest way. But if they were to contact us.
This is Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation.
Yeah. So they've just changed their website recently. They did a nice update to it. So I'm not sure where that information would be. But if someone was interested, if they were to reach out to either ourselves or our HCTF, we could help facilitate that.
So that sounds like maybe a good workaround. But I'm wondering, has the Freshwater Fisheries Society of BC ever looked at just being able to get a charitable, I don't even know what to call it, a license or a number, so that it makes it really easy for people to donate and have because look, reality is, if you can get a tax receipt, you're going to get way more people donating than someone who is not. Yeah.
So our CFO and our board have looked into that.
Yeah.
There's different tax rules depending on if you're a charitable not-for-profit or a not-for-profit. And at this point, it doesn't look like it makes business sense for us to do that.
Yeah.
We would probably have to do quite a bit of fundraising for some of the benefits that we lose as just a not-for-profit. So I don't understand all of the tax implications, but there are different tax implications depending on what type of not-for-profit you are.
Right. Well, there's another one for Minister Donaldson. I mean, the way I see it, he's going to get a lot of heat from me on this one, but I look at it and think to myself, if I can make a donation to the BC NDP or the BC Liberal Party or the BC Green Party and get a tax receipt for these guys to fight with each other in the Legislative Assembly, pound tables and whistle at each other, the least we should be able to do is also donate to your organization. But it sounds like this is a good workaround, which is so if I were to say donate $1,000 to the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation, can I say I want 100% of my money to go to whatever you're working on with Freshwater Fisheries Society? Oh, okay, that's great. Okay, super. So there's your workaround. The other question my father-in-law wanted to ask, he believes that, now this, I guess, this is down the avenue of salmon, so maybe you can't answer this question, but he believes that a lot of the fish fry that are coming out of the rivers, and I'm assuming he's talking about salmon fry, but maybe this applies to steelhead as well, are coming they're traveling through fish farms that are nets. They're farms out in the ocean that are netted with all these fish inside that have a lot of disease, and believes that a lot of these fish fry are not living. They're picking up disease as being in the same way that a young child is more susceptible to sickness than us as adults. And he's wondering if you had any thoughts on that, which is he thinks that maybe one of the reasons we're seeing less salmon stocks coming back is because a lot of them are traveling through and interacting with these farmed salmon, not the adult ones, but the fish. He mentioned the fish fry because the nets are obviously are tight enough to keep the adults in and the other adults out. Yep. But the fry can travel right through those little nets. They pick up these diseases and then they don't live. Have you got any kind of thoughts on that?
I'll be honest, I'm not up on all the current research around that issue. I know it's certainly been a hot topic one. All I can say is that our changing climate is definitely impacting salmon and species that spend time in the ocean in multiple different ways. And so warmer temperatures also make fish more susceptible to
You guys
to
are really
disease.
seeing that.
And so
how about even fish that don't touch the ocean, like trout that are in lakes?
So when water temperatures are warmer, trout definitely feel stressed from that as well.
Because you were saying the pH balance changes, it becomes more basic.
And even so, if people are fishing in the summertime and releasing fish in warmer water holds less oxygen. So
really?
So the fish are going to feel stressed from that as well. And so often people will, even in a freshwater system, you can catch fish. So there is natural diseases in our environment, and parasites. And so even in the summertime, if you're fishing a local lake, especially in the peak of summer, you might find little copepods behind the gills of trout in lakes as well. So those are natural. They're not harmful.
Yeah.
So if you catch a fish and kill it, then notice it, you can still eat them. Make sure you always cook your fish thoroughly.
Yes, the health advisory.
Stay healthy. But so it's
So the global warming is really truly a big factor here in the health of the fish system.
There's going to be some winners and then some losers.
Yeah.
And it's interesting as well because when it comes to the salmon stocks on BC's coast, I mean, we hear a lot of doom and gloom, but some of the stocks are actually doing fine.
Are they?
Right? So
we don't definitely end this on a bad note, on a sour note.
So some of them are doing fine.
Let's talk about some of the successes. That actually was going to be my next question.
So some of them are doing fine. So when you talk to some of the people that were fishing this year, even in the ocean, some of them had some of their, depending on where you were, some of them had one of their better years. Right. So you would never know it from what you hear in the media. Yeah. And when it comes to our inland fisheries, I mean, really most of those are very healthy still. Okay. So most of our rainbow trout stocks, kokanee stocks, they are thriving. They're doing really well. Yeah. Some people claim they had one of their best summers of fishing. We had no smoke this summer, right?
Right, so that's true, the water, first time in 2 years.
It didn't get too hot.
Yeah.
Fish were healthy and happy. And I think that there's a lot of good news stories out there as well that we just don't hear about.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Well, that's why we're doing this conversation. Yeah. And actually, so that was one of my questions. Was about what location would you say, like, do you have any? You mentioned you have different stocking programs. Yep. Is there any one in particular you could speak to that you're like, these guys are knocking out of the park? I mean, they're just so good. They're so passionate. Maybe you've got one individual you'd like to name that you want to, or a group of people or a certain region that have really, proven that, they can help rebuild or make a really healthy system.
Well, I would say that if someone is looking, so maybe hasn't fished, done any freshwater fishing before and loves to eat fish, One of the species that they should look to target, especially if they like to fish in the summertime,
Yeah.
are kokanee.
Okay.
They taste delicious.
Yeah.
We're stocking more and more lakes with them because anglers love them.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I think is something that every Canadian should experience and try at some point,
Yeah.
and is growing in popularity, is ice fishing.
Yes.
Right? And so if you live in the Lower Mainland and have never tried ice fishing, I would highly recommend doing a trip into the interior. Go and find a nice frozen lake. You got to remember to bring an auger.
Yes.
Cut a hole in the ice, and it's really you can like lean over and just look in the hole and watch the fish swimming by
crazy.
and hook them, right? And it's a great way to go out and spend a few hours with your family, and then you can eat them when you're finished, right?
Yeah. Amazing.
So yeah, I would highly recommend that people try ice fishing and try kokanee fishing if they like to eat fish.
So is this, Ross, this here's kokanee fish? So just so people know, the history of the kokanee is, the theory is that these, if I get this right, was these fish used to be, ocean going salmon, just like all the other salmon we know. But over, millions of years of evolution of our planet and, plates hitting each other and mountains being created and whatnot, these fish became landlocked.
Yep. So these are landlocked sockeye salmon.
Sockeye salmon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
they've got a bright red.
Do they travel at all, or?
So they live primarily in larger lake bodies.
Yeah.
And so they'll spawn in the stream, and then juvenile sockeye will also spend a year right in a large lake before they head to the ocean. Well, these ones just grow in the lakes, and they're eating zooplankton, and they get that bright red color on the inside. They taste quite similar to salmon.
Yeah. Where is probably the most populous waterways for kokanee? Other rivers or lakes?
Yeah. So closest to the Lower Mainland would probably be Kakwa Lake out by Hope.
Okay.
So that one's got kokanee in it. And then once you get up into around Kamloops, there's Monty Lake, which is right alongside the highway between Kamloops and Vernon. You'll see people, if you're driving by there in the wintertime, if you're there in like January and kokanee fishing is good, you'll know. Paul Lake near Kamloops. Bridge Lake up near up in the Caribou along Highway 24. There's a number of lakes up. Actually, the Caribou is known for its kokanee fishing.
Yeah.
And if people just want to check out a new location, if there's probably people that are living elsewhere in the province are like, hey, you didn't mention where I live. But yeah, if they want to look at our website, we show all the lakes that we stock with kokanee, but there's other lakes that we don't stock either that are
really healthy and
doing just fine.
Yeah.
Wood Lake in
how do you know when you've
Okanagan?
caught a wild fish versus a stocked fish?
Most people won't know.
No. Okay.
No.
Do you guys? I know with the salmon they clip that. Was it called the dorsal fin? Is that what it's called?
So you can do different clippings, but So for the most part, we stock some lakes that have wild production.
Yeah.
But it's usually pretty minimal.
Okay.
So most people, if they're lakes that we stock are primarily have just stocked fish in them.
I see.
Right. So
these would be lakes that naturally never really had wild trout or
there's intermittent stream flow or not consistent, where there's enough stream flow and the fish can reproduce on their own.
Okay.
Most of those lakes are doing just totally fine on their own.
Yeah. Wow. What was you'd answer this before, but just make sure we're clear. So when it comes to deciding what lakes and rivers are open, that's decided not by yourselves, but by the province of BC.
Yep, that's right.
Okay. So and where does that information? Where would people know if they're new like Ross and I, or they don't have a lot of experience? How would we know what lakes and rivers are open?
So in BC, it's a little bit different than salmon fisheries.
Okay.
Because salmon fisheries are sort of like these short windows where there's openings, right?
Yeah.
Most lakes and rivers are open year round.
Oh.
So if you're fishing in a certain region, you want to have a look at the regulations. The first thing you want to figure out is where you are in the province, which region you're in. And then there will be regional regulations at the beginning. So it'll tell you how many fish you can keep in each lake or river for that region. And then, and if there's any seasonal closures. So some of the river fisheries don't open until end of the spring, basically into June. So after fish have spawned. And then there will also be a list of tables that have water body specific regulations. So if there was, say, a lake that was being managed to grow larger size fish and you could only keep 1/50, you'd have to check that table just to see if the lake or river you're fishing has any water specific regulations. But if it's not listed in that table, you just have to refer to the regional regulations.
Okay, great. Well, this has been phenomenal. What an interesting conversation. I had no idea we were going to get into all this, and it's been I've learned a lot.
Oh, good.
This is the map here, right under where'd you find this, Ross?
No, this is right on the website.
Yeah.
Okay, so
this
it's
is
under
our where to fish page.
Yeah.
And so this shows all of the lakes that we stock in BC. So
Okay.
there's over 800 lakes. Some of them are stocked annually. Some of them are only stocked every 2 years. There's a filter there, so you can actually filter and see which lakes we have fishing docks on, where our rod loan sites are.
Oh, so foot access.
And if you
Incredible.
zoom in, or maybe just click on just one of those individual pins. Just if you zoom in onto the map. There's that individual pin that's up in the north. If you click on.
You have a
Anyways.
touch screen, Ross, so you can actually use your finger too.
Yeah, so if you click on one of those pins, it'll give you information about
look at that.
about the individual lake.
Telegraph Creek, surface area 31, elevation 347 meters.
Yeah.
Last stocked on.
Yeah, and so if you click
June.
on, and it'll show you, if you click on the view stocking report, it will then open up the stocking report page
Yeah.
and show you what we've stocked and when.
Oh, look at that.
And for quite a few lakes, we also have what are called bathymetric maps. So it's basically like the bottom of the lake elevation maps.
Yeah.
And so if we have those for the lake, it'll also be in that link.
Right. This is the fish you were talking about earlier, the Blackwater, what did you call it?
The Blackwater strain.
Strain. Yeah. These are the ones that will eat smaller fish as they get older.
Yeah.
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 Wow. Oh, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming today.
Well, thank
you. If people want to get involved, they should just go to gofishbc.com.
Yep.
And buy yourselves a license. I'm going to do that because even if you don't go fishing, it helps support the organization.
We appreciate every single license dollar we get. Yes.
Yeah. And if you do want to donate, again, the other website was, remind me.
HCTF.
HCTF.ca. It's the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation.
Yeah, so they're one of our
Or just get in touch with you.
Or just, so on our website, there's an email contact at the bottom of every page, and we would be happy to answer any questions around that.
Right. Great. Well, we have Stacy Webb, Director of Marketing and Communications for the Freshwater Fisheries Society of BC. And as my father-in-law would say, tight lines.